Imagine living your life after 50 and feeling energized and excited about your future. Welcome to the Women in the Middle podcast, the podcast for women who are ready to figure out what they want and create the life they deserve. Here's your host and master certified life coach, Susie Rosenstein.
Hey there, today's episode is all about life as a baby boomer being full of opportunity. Let's go. Welcome back to the podcast Women in the Middle with over 1 million downloads and counting. I'm your host, Susie Rosenstein, your master certified coach and midlife clarity expert, and I am so glad to be here with you again. So, I want to start with a question. Do you really think there are still opportunities for you when you get older, like 70 or 75 or 80? Do you think there are? It's always so interesting to think about what you really think about aging, what you are spinning on when you're honest with yourself. This is what so many of us are doing right now, finding all kinds of thoughts about getting older that both surprise us and they're not always true. The baby boomers are up to their ears in this kind of thinking right now, and my guest today will shed some light on what it's really like to be a baby boomer today. But just quick, before we dive in, I'm also excited to invite you to download a copy of Top 10 Tips to Reimagine Your Life After 50 or 60 or 70 or more. It is free and super useful when you're looking for some journal prompts to start thinking about who you are, who you want to become, what you want, and what is really possible for you no matter your age. So head over to www.susierosenstein.com/10 questions. And it's the number 10 questions. Okay, now let's dive in. This week's episode is about being a baby boomer, specifically life as a baby boomer, and how it's actually full of opportunity with my special guest, Wendy Green. Wendy is the host of the inspiring live show and podcast, Hey Boomer, which is full of real talk about aging well. Wendy's serving an important inspirational role for people 55 to 75 who are looking for ways to live meaningful, fulfilling lives. Her goal is to help people see that they are never too old to set another goal or dream or new dream. Graduating from University of North Carolina at Asheville with a degree in computer science, Wendy entered the computer field as a programmer and moved into customer support at Digital Equipment Corp. It was at Digital that she built and grew the U.S. Expertise Center. After moving to Maryland, she earned a certificate from Georgetown University in change management. And then in 2005, she started a kids' art business, an after-school enrichment program, and was recognized as the Franchisee of the Year in 2009. And then in 2013, she trained for and was certified as a life coach. Step by step, interest after interest, she just kept leaning into what she was interested in. Now, Wendy also served as president of the Reedy River Rotary Club in Greenville, South Carolina for 2 years. Along with all of these diverse business successes, Wendy has raised 2 successful children and is a grandparent to 4 outstanding and lovable grandchildren. Wendy knows what she loves to do, and she knows she can make a valuable contribution in her life. She's a great example of how your life as a baby boomer can really surprise you. There's still plenty of time to dive deeper into your passion, have fun, and be fulfilled no matter your age. So you are sure to get a lot out of this episode. Please enjoy. Hi, Wendy. Thanks so much for joining us today on the Women in the Middle podcast.
Hi, Susie. I'm so glad to be here. Thank you.
Me too. And you know, it's so fun when the internet world or the podcast world or the online world brings people together. We were brought together by a guest that I had interviewed who met you and said, oh my God, you have to meet Wendy. And then as soon as we connected, you're like, are you related to Carol Rosenstein, who's my cousin, who was on your podcast? So it's a totally small world.
Totally small world. I know. I love that.
I love it.
Canada, and I'm in South Carolina.
Well, there's that too. It is just craziness, especially because I don't know about you. I was a late adopter to the podcast app and to smartphones. And actually, I remember it so clearly. I had a friend who was not quite as much of a late adopter as I was. She's about 5 years younger than me. And we were out to dinner once and she looked at my phone and she laughed. She's like, what is that flip phone doing? on your person. You need a smartphone. Look at this. And I had no idea. Like, it's so interesting to me that I was such a later adopter about a lot of things. And then here I am being, having a podcast seems to be very interesting to my friends and people I
Right.
meet. Same
I
experience with you?
Oh, totally. I was definitely a late adopter. I'm like, I didn't even turn my phone on when I'd go out and I'd get in trouble for that, but it's like, if people want to talk to me, they can leave me a message on my house phone. We don't even have those anymore. But I think being a podcaster is really cool talking points for my grandkids. They're like, oh, my grandmother is a podcaster.
Well, there are many reasons that I think you're amazing. The first thing is that your podcast is called Hey Boomer. And I was so interested to have you on because we're 10 years apart. I turned 60 this year. You turned 70. And we have so much to talk about because I don't know about you. I don't think of myself as this age. And there's nothing wrong with thinking about this age in any way that works for you. But I certainly still think of myself in my late 30s. That's where I am when I think about it.
Yeah, it's weird. In fact, I was talking to my partner the other day. He's 75, and neither one of us feel like what we thought 70 and 75 was going to feel like. I don't like it when people say, oh, 70 is the new 50. I'm like, no, 70 is the new 70. Look at us, alive, vibrant, engaged, still dancing, still hiking, yeah, but certainly not what our grandparents' 70 was.
That's for sure. And also not what the sitcoms in the 70s were helping us think about what this chapter was going to look like. So we were
Exactly.
really shaped by that stuff, right?
Oh, we totally were. And I think that is part of this internal ageism that we fight all the time, because society says you're done. You should be sitting back on the porch with a rocker or playing golf. And we're like, no, 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 we're not done. We still have a lot left to do.
Not that there's anything wrong with a really high quality rocker.
Exactly,
Well,
exactly.
but what I really like to do on my podcast is to talk about your trajectory, what your journey was like, where you started professionally, what was going on in your life, and what kind of helped you have an epiphany of the direction that you're in now that is bringing you so much fulfillment and happiness. So let's start. Let's go in the Wayback Machine. Let's talk a little bit about what was going on in your 40s. And yeah, there's a good story there. So let's take it away.
Yeah, 40s were pretty turbulent. I had been working in the technology industry and mostly in training and development. And maybe you know this, but whenever there's a downturn in industry, training and development is one of the first areas they want to cut, because
Yes.
it's not generating revenue. And so I had been through several of those downturns in the industry. And at 42, I think it was, and my son was graduating from high school and going off to college, and suddenly my company was downsizing, and he went to Georgetown. I was in Atlanta, and I was like, there's nothing keeping me in Atlanta. So I went to Maryland and got a job up there. And that was fine for a while. And then they sold that company. Like, golly. So I decided, okay, there's a real pattern here of change and disruption. And so I went to Georgetown and I got a certification in change leadership. So I thought, oh,
Perfect.
right? Now I know what this change is all about. And I moved out of technology training and leadership into HR, so leadership development and performance improvements and managing the change in organizations. And that was great. And then the owner of the company and I had some real disagreements about how you treat employees. And he decided that I was not a good fit for the company. And the day before 9/11, he told me he was letting me go.
Mm.
So I was actually in my office on 9/11 talking to my staff when the planes hit the Pentagon. And, we were right there, right outside of DC. So that was a pretty scary time. And suddenly I'm without a job. The whole world has gone upside down. And I didn't have a network there because I was still relatively new to the area. And it was highly traumatic, Susie, highly, highly unsettling. And I really was stopped in my tracks for a while. And one day my son said, Mom, you always like teaching. Why don't you go into teaching? And of course, my ego was like, heck no, I'm used to making real money in corporate America. I'm not taking that kind of pay cut. And plus I'd have to go back to school. So I finally did settle down and became a center director for a learning center, which was a pay cut, but I loved it. I found that I loved working with the kids and I loved building the business. And that was really my first time building my own business. And well, it wasn't my business, but I was building it. Anyway, so I tried to buy it. She didn't want to sell it. So that's when I went into my kids art practice. I bought a franchise called Kids Art, which was great fun and great learning for the kids, both intellectually, creatively, and holistically. It was really a great program. Meanwhile, I had remarried in there too. I forgot to mention that. But during that time, when the business wasn't really going and the marriage was falling apart again, and I was like, oh my gosh, okay. So I was trying to figure out what to do next, and I went to see a coach. And one day she said to me, I think you'd make a really good coach. And it was like that light bulb moment, Susie. It's like, that's it. All this time, that's it. That's what I want to do. I want to bring out the best in people. And that's what I was doing with my training. And that's what I was doing with kids art. I was like, yes.
It's so obvious, and I always say this, that we're on the right path. We just don't understand it. We don't see the connections because of the way we are framing what's going on. And it may have looked different. Oh, it's a kid thing. It's an art thing versus it's a learning thing versus it's a transition, change management thing. Oh, it's a corporate thing, but really it's all so similar what you're doing in the core. So good. What a great epiphany. I love a good coach.
Well, and it's the bringing out the best in people. That's always what I've tried to do. And it didn't dawn on me that was the thread that went through it until that moment. And that's what happens with the podcast too. But I don't know if you want to talk about that yet.
Well, not just yet. I love thinking about behavior change and what it was. You got a little input there. You had something novel just happened. Somebody suggested something that resonated with you. Not everybody does something with a little tidbit like that, but you did. So what was it like for you to pivot again and take ownership of this new idea of what you could pursue and who you could become?
Yeah, it was a little scary, for
Just
sure.
a bit, yes.
Because, like you said, there have been so many pivots already. But I started to explore different coaching programs to find one that I thought fit the type of person I was and the type of coaching that would work best for me. And when I found it, I realized, oh, this is really expensive to get certified as a coach.
You know what's so funny? If your son would have come to you and said, listen, I feel so committed to this new direction. This is what it's going to cost for me to get this degree or to become certified. Your reaction probably would have been a little bit different.
That's so funny, right? I was going to have to go back to school to be a teacher. And here I was ready to plop down a bunch of money to be a coach. But it felt right. I knew I didn't want to just be in a classroom. It just felt so right to be a coach. So I did. I plopped down the money. And I have to say, if I got nothing else out of it but the insights that I gained from the coaching program, it was worth it. I mean, it was a
Yeah.
fabulous experience.
Well, the other thing was that you dipped your toe into the entrepreneurial mindset in that other position where you were, for the first time, thinking about the growth of the business, even though that first one wasn't yours, the second one was.
Right.
And so this direction is very different than going in the classic teaching direction. So where you're working, for somebody else in a very strict, structured system versus this idea would be entrepreneurial.
Very entrepreneurial. And I think that's the part that was scary for me. Where am
Yeah.
I going to find these clients? Like once you run through your friends, it's like, where am I going to find my clients? And that was probably the hardest part of putting together a coaching practice. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. So eventually at some point you came up with this idea for Hey Boomers. So how did you pivot from this change kind of interest to Hey Boomer?
So when I sold kids art and I was learning to be a coach, I still needed income. So I did take a job with another company where I was managing their training and I was doing coaching on the side. 2020, March, the pandemic hit.
Oh, yeah.
And, so laid off again. And I remember walking in. So my mother is, 93. I had to be even more careful to not get COVID because I needed to be available to her. So I'm walking around my house feeling very isolated and saying to myself, well, I've been here before. I know what this layoff stuff is, and I know how devastating it can be. And so as a coach, I said to myself, well, how do you want to feel? And I said, I want to feel relevant. I want to feel like I still matter. I want to feel like I can still make a difference. And I realized there's going to be a lot of people in my age group that needed to feel that because they were impacted so negatively by this pandemic and layoffs and all of that. I did not know about podcasting like you. I'm late to the game. So I thought, well, maybe I'll do a Facebook Live and just be inspiring and tell people stories about what it was like to be growing up as a boomer. And that's how it started. It started as a Facebook Live. I called a few friends. I said, hey, I'm going to try and do this thing. Would you be guests? And then I've learned so much since then. So now we stream live to Facebook, LinkedIn, and YouTube, and then take the audio and go to podcast.
Mm,
But the name, Susie, the name was a reaction to, okay, boomer. And,
yeah.
I found that to be very disrespectful. And I thought, no, as boomers, we were so committed, at least the boomer generation that I knew, so committed to making change, to making things better. And the work is still going on, you know. Um, yeah, we are
It's
still constantly trying to improve. And so is the next generation and the next generation. And, it's not done. It never is done. But that's, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I'm curious though, because you could have spoken about anything and you decided to start talking about our experience at growing up,
Yes.
when we did. And so I'm wondering, were you particularly mindful of aging and work? Why were you thinking about your age so much at that particular point?
That's a really good question. I think there's two parts to it. One is that I was proud of the involvement that I had been part of my whole life. I had, grown up during the Vietnam War and all the upheaval of the Nixon administration. I mean, there was just so much. The assassinations of our president, and there was a lot. So I never stopped being involved and trying to make a change. And so I was proud of that. And I wanted to talk about that. And I think also the aging question is a good question, Susie, because I realized that as we get older, there is ageism, no matter how experienced we are, how good we are, trying to find the next job. People will say, well, you're too expensive, or you're too experienced, or we need somebody that's going to stay with us longer. All those excuses. And I said, okay, so we need to make our own reality. We need to find our own inner strength, and we need to know we can still make a difference. And that was really what started me down this trajectory.
I love that so much. I have a funny memory about the first time I did a Facebook Live. I was so scared. I bought a $7 program online, on how to do a Facebook Live step by step from somebody who was really good at teaching simple, internet marketing stuff. She had years of experience, and I went step by step. And it was so funny because I did it. And then I had a client. It's unusual, but I did have a client who was in his late 20s and a male. But at that time I did. And I told him about Facebook Live, and I happened to hop on his first Facebook Live, and you could see his finger poking it, and he didn't care. He had so much less concern about judgment than I did. I wanted it to be perfect and polished. And he was just like messing around, poking things. The angle was weird. Didn't care about his double chin. You know what I mean?
That's right. That's right. Because he is so comfortable with the technology, and
It was so fascinating to watch. So for a second, can we talk a little bit about some of the differences between Boomer and Gen X, and what you notice, what's come up for you? Because I was born in 1963. So I'm like at the end. So I kind of feel
64 is the end of the Boomer generation.
64, right. Yeah. So I feel, so I'm not really even the end. I thought I was 1 year in. I am 1 year in. So
right. That's right. Whew, we're so confused. We're good at math, right?
Yes, very good at math. So I always felt like I'm not completely one or the other, because certainly I don't really relate to all of what's characteristically, classic about those. So can you talk a little bit about what stands out for you as a baby boomer?
Yeah, and it is hard to generalize. I do get comments from people that say boomer is derogatory. Don't call me a boomer, and da. But to me, I think of the boomers as kind of counterculture, a lot, right? We grew up with the hippies and like I said, the Vietnam War, and, lots of rock concerts. There was a lot of drugs. The birth control pill became, available. I mean, there was a lot of things, a lot of change that happened during that generation. And there was a lot of scary stuff too. I mean, I remember living in Miami in the Cuban Missile Crisis, and thinking we were going to have a nuclear bomb dropped on our heads, and then Kennedy being killed, and then Martin Luther King, and then it was like, oh my God, the whole world is going to end as we know it. So It was a pretty scary time. And it was a time where, as we became teens and older, to start to feel like, okay, we can't let this continue down this path, or we're not going to have a life. And so that's when we got very involved in the political aspects of that generation.
Oh, that perspective is really good. And so when you think about what's classically going on with Gen X, what comes up?
So Gen X is my kids, right? I mean, they're younger than you, but they're in their late 40s already, which is shocking. But, they grew up a lot in the time when we wanted to make life so good for them. And I remember, there wasn't, certainly not the kind of punishment that we went through as young kids. We always like to give them choices and, you
Oh
know,
my gosh. The way we grew up with punishment, it's so different.
it's so different, right?
Oh my God. It was cringeworthy.
Right?
It was acceptable.
I know. And now it was like, all right, so do you want this or that? Would you like to go into timeout or would you like to go to your room? So they now feel very much emboldened with their voice,
Yes.
in my perspective, and they're, certainly okay with telling me when they think I've stepped over a line,
Oh,
which
I
we
have that
would
same experience.
never, right? We would
It's so
never say
funny.
that to our parents. Like,
No, and I've said that. I've said, oh my God, I would never talk to my mother the way you're speaking to me right now.
I know, but we taught them to do that, didn't we?
Oh, and it's never that bad, but it's just so different.
So
It's
different.
just so different. So what do you see with the millennials? I just love the way you're at a high level characterizing this stuff. I think it's really, really important. So, what do you see with the millennials other than they grew up with technology,
They did grow up with technology,
which
and
is huge.
yes, yes. I mean that, like they were born with a smartphone in their hands. I think that millennials grew up with more of a sense of realism, because they have been faced with a lot of challenges. Um, you know, the 24-hour news cycle has certainly made a difference in their lives. They don't have the role models. I think when we were growing up, we had role models that we thought, okay, so there are people we can look up to. I wonder sometimes, and I feel bad, and maybe I'm putting them with Gen Z too. I feel bad for them. Like, where's their hope coming from? Who do they look at and say, oh, okay, that person's a good leader. That person's going to help us come out of this morass. They're going to save the climate for us. I worry about, and then of course the lockdown with the pandemic, many of them were, at least Gen Z, were still in school. Um, yeah, we grew up with nuclear bomb fears and assassinations. They're growing up with wondering if the planet's going to be here for them.
Mm, yeah. Yeah. And a lot of times when you just, read something brief about what's going on with millennials or whatever, this growing up with technology is what often gets mentioned at the top. And when I think about it, yeah, what was I doing with technology? I got a calculator in grade 11, a
Mhm.
science calculator. It was very exciting. And then, then there was the video, the early, Pac-Man and stuff like that was just coming on as I was going in high school and university. But I was still typing reports on a typewriter in
Mm.
university. It's just so interesting to think about the differences. But what you're talking about, these high level things that are really shaping attitudes and feelings of safety, have really been helpful. And it just really helps you appreciate more what's going on for people in the workplace, what's going on for people as parents, what's going on for people with their ideas and the economy and what they're able to afford and not afford, housing,
Yeah.
mortgages, all kinds of stuff. It's
In fact,
yeah.
the other day I was talking to my son. Their daughter just started driving, and they have an app where they can see where she's going, see how fast she's going, see if she's texting on her phone. And I said to him, that's like so different. When you left the house in the car for the first time, I just had to hold my breath and pray you would be back. Now they're so involved, and I don't know I don't know. I don't know if I like that, but of course I can't comment on that to them, but it's very different now.
It's different. Yeah.
And
Yeah. I remember when my oldest he went to Europe for the first, like his first big trip without a family member of some
yeah,
sort. He wasn't visiting family. He wasn't with family. And I thought I was going to die. Like I felt so panicked and so out of control. until I realized internet means that he can check in, even a little check-in, even Facebook was more useful than I ever imagined in a situation like that. It just, back in the day, we were using calling cards, and it was,
That's
when you
right.
go away for 2 weeks, you're away for 2 weeks. That's it.
That's right. That's right. Because long distance phone calls were expensive.
Very expensive. And I remember always thinking, what's the difference between a friend you can rely on and a friend you can't rely on? Well, if you're going away for 2 weeks and you talk to somebody about picking you up at the airport in 2 weeks on Saturday at 2:30, a real friend you can count on. There are other friends that you just know won't cut the mustard on that one.
Yeah, that's funny.
Anyway, you've certainly seen a lot, and so now you've got a podcast. And what kind of things are you talking about on Hey Boomer?
Yeah, so really interesting because I said when we started, it was all about, I still matter, I can still make a difference. And so for the last 3.5 years, almost 4 now, I've been talking about that, reinvention and all of the things that are possible for us now. And I've had guests on who have done the most amazing things like you have too, and they're all inspiring. And I think turning 70 and having a guest talk about estrangement, it was a moment for pivoting again. And I said, okay, there's a lot of people talking about reinvention. I want to go deeper. And so this year we're talking all about relationships. And so we're going to be we just finished talking about estrangement. We're going to be talking about caregiving and how it impacts the person being cared for and the caregiver. And what if you're aging alone? Those kinds of things. We're going to talk about gray divorce and then reintegrating new people into families and, how all of that works. So it should be an interesting series for this year. I'm really excited about it. And we've had some very, very good discussions so far. So that's where I'm going with it this year.
I love that. And you're right. Those topics, you hear about them here and there. I've dealt with a couple of them on the podcast, but not the way that you're going about it. It's great because you're really going deeper. I did listen to a couple of these episodes. They're fantastic. I highly recommend, if any of these topics are resonating with you, to check out Hey Boomer, because it's harder to find people to talk about this. Some of these topics you're just not talking about with your friends.
That's right. That's right. Because there's
Too much stigma.
Yeah.
Yeah. Shame, stigma. It's just too uncomfortable. Maybe you don't even know, you don't even know what to think sometimes, depending on what's going on. It can be very overwhelming. Yeah. So one of the things that really stands out from your path forward out of corporate into entrepreneur land is that you're very resilient. Did you know that you were so resilient growing up?
Did I know I was resilient? Probably not growing up. I think I started to realize, though, after my divorce, the kids were 2 and 4. I was 28. I didn't have college degree yet. And I was like, okay, so kicked myself in the butt and said, we got to make something happen here. And it was on my own, my parents weren't paying for college at that point. And I was, no, you made your bed, now you lay in it.
So one of the things that comes up all the time when we're talking about transition, opportunity, possibility is the emotion of fear. So you tell us a little bit about how fear has come up for you and what you've done about it, how you've managed it.
That is a great question, and thank you. Because certainly fear has stopped me at times and motivated me at times. When I start to hear the little voice in my head that's saying, you're not good enough, they're going to find out you don't know everything, all of that, it does a number on my stomach and my neck and my shoulders. And I have to step back and get quiet. That's really what helps me. I get quiet and I write in my journal, and I I say to myself, you know, that's not true. You know that you may not know everything, but you know a lot. And you're good at what you do. So I think that's part of it, Susie. And I think I've also very fortunately found one or two champions over my lifetime that have believed in me and that have said, you can do this. You are smart and you're resilient and you're well spoken and you're confident, you can do this. And having those champions and writing in my journal, I really think has helped me to face some of those fears.
I love that. And courage isn't an experience that you do without fear.
That's right.
Right? You feel fear, you just acknowledge that you feel it, but courage is when you keep moving in that direction anyway. I
Exactly.
remember one time I was doing something scary and I was with a champion and she said, well, you can borrow my confidence.
How nice. I like that.
I couldn't believe it. I thought that's such a weird concept, but I love it. I will do that right away. He had total confidence in me, no doubt, right? And I'm like, wow, I think I will do that right now.
What a sweet gift.
So sweet. And it was just so freeing.
Yeah.
Yes, you have permission to be exactly who you are and keep moving in this direction. It's all good.
And sometimes as women, we do tell ourselves, you can't act all brave and confident and why not? We don't have to be arrogant about it, but we certainly can say, I'm good at what I do and I can learn anything that I want to learn. So why not? Why can't we say that?
So true. We can feel however we want to feel. It's an inside job. So good.
Inside job for sure.
Okay, Wendy. So how can people get a hold of you? All this goodness.
Yeah. So certainly listen to Hey Boomer, wherever you get your podcast. I have a website, heyboomer.biz, B-I-Z, and I'm happy for people to email me, Wendy at heyboomer.biz.
That's so great. And what comes to mind right away, and I'm sure you've dealt with this too, that there are a lot of people in our cohort, our age group that aren't familiar with podcasts yet. I've had so many interesting conversations where I can tell they don't really appreciate what I'm offering or what I'm sharing. I like to call a podcast a party in your purse. I really believe it's a party in your purse. Say it all the time. There's so much good stuff. I could learn about gardening. I could learn about fish keeping. I could learn about self-development or retirement strategies. Like, it doesn't matter. There are so many things, so many offerings. But if you don't even know that there's an app on your phone or any number of apps that you could listen to, then you'll be missing out on the party. So I always say that if you are a podcast gal and you have a friend who doesn't know about the amazing podcast that you're listening to, please share. And don't just say, hey, you should listen to. Take out their phone and show them where the app is. Because even the app, I have had all these conversations where people have never even clicked it. They don't even know. It's like they kind of think that's not for me or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
So share the goodness. The Hey Boomer podcast is waiting for you. Just like Women in the Middle. Tell a friend.
And I'm going to tell a friend, Susie, about your show because this has been so much fun. I've loved listening to what you're doing on Women in the Middle. So, yeah, supporting each other is the best.
It is. Thank you so much. Wendy, you're awesome. Thanks for everything. Thanks for sharing. And thanks for just, doing the thing and dealing with these difficult topics this year on your podcast is really going to help people. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Susie. It's been a pleasure.
That's it for this episode. So good. When you take a close look at your life and are curious about the threads of where you've always been engaged and what you've always been really interested in, what it is that you did that you always needed more of, you are sure to find connections and patterns. That's what happened with Wendy. And let me tell you, it was pretty surprising for both of us to be producing a podcast at this point in our lives. But we both love it. And it feels so good to be passionate about your work and know that you're giving back in a meaningful way. Now, as you know, this podcast is all about how to love your life again after 50. It's all about coaching you to be more intentional and to incorporate mindfulness into your life as a regular practice. This is how you put yourself on your agenda. My focus as your midlife coach is to help you get unstuck, clear, and focused on your current values and priorities so you don't have regrets. I can help you create the excitement and meaning you're looking for. I would love to be able to help you be happier and more fulfilled than ever before. The shift that you can have when you learn how to take care of yourself this way has been described as life-changing. Let's talk about how coaching together might help you too. Go ahead and book your momentum call at www.womeninthemiddleacademy.com and we'll chat. Remember, you're also invited to download a copy of Top 10 Tips to Reimagine Your Life After 50 or 60 or 70. Head over to www.susierosenstein.com/10 questions. And finally, for show notes and links, head over to www.susierosenstein.com and click the podcast tab and look for episode 365. You will also see links there for my new show, Women in the Middle Entrepreneurs. Thanks so much for listening. It is time for you to put yourself first, one thought at a time. I'm Susie Rosenstein, and I'll talk to you next week.